Go.
Hey, this is Russell Moore, and this is Reading in Exile, where I go through the library, pull something off, and talk about it off the shelf. And several of you have asked about Eugene Peterson, knowing that I'm somebody who admires the work of Eugene Peterson a great deal. Have wondered, what would you recommend? One person said that he had read The Message, parts of it, but that was, which is Eugene Peterson's paraphrase of the Bible. And said, but what of his books would you recommend? Because there are a lot of them. Eugene Peterson was a pastor out west, Presbyterian pastor in Montana, and wrote a ton. I don't know how he wrote as much as he did. So there's a lot of things to choose from. I would say you're in good shape reading anything that you find under the name of Eugene Peterson. But I wanted to choose 4 or 5 of my favorites. If I were to say, this is what I would recommend. One of those would be this, Run with the Horses. And I think one of the reasons that I like this book a lot is because it's essentially a commentary on Jeremiah, which is one of my favorite books of the Bible for all sorts of reasons. Maybe we'll talk about that sometime. But some examples of what he says in this would be here. He says at one point, Scripture's task is to tell people, at the risk of their displeasure, the mystery of God and the secrets of their own hearts. That is just totally true. And then he says, talking about disaster and exile, all of us are given moments, days, months, years of exile. What will we do with them? Wish we were someplace else? Complain? Escape into fantasies? Drug ourselves into oblivion? Or build and plant and marry and seek the shalom of the place we inhabit and the people we are with? Exile reveals what really matters and frees us to pursue what really matters, which is to seek the Lord with all our hearts. I think that's something we probably all need to hear right now in quarantine. Another one that I really like is called Under the Unpredictable Plant, an exploration in vocational holiness, which is about 2 things. It's sort of a reflection on the book of Jonah, and also talking about what it means to be in vocational service, the pastorate or other ways of serving the Lord, and some really, really good stuff. I think about all the time. He talks about in here about getting to the point where he was so exhausted that he found it very difficult to pray. I've been in that situation before. Maybe some of you have been in it. Not because he couldn't find the time, like on the schedule, to pray, but he was just too depleted. And so he went to the elders of his congregation, and they gave him this sabbatical. And he went to one of the elders' meetings, and one of the elders said to him, "Don't you trust us?" And so he talked about what a revelation that was, that he had to learn to trust the people around him in order to be served, not just to serve. That's just great. And then this is one of my favorite things. He says, a congregation is topsoil, seething with energy and organisms that have incredible capacities for assimilating death and participating in resurrection. And the only biblical stance before it is awe. When we see what is before us, really before us, pastors take off their shoes before the Shekinah of congregation. That's a great word. And then 2 of my favorites of all time, Eugene Peterson. As a matter of fact, if I had to recommend just 2 of them, it would be these 2 that came out really late in his life. One of them, As Kingfishers Catch Fire, taking off of that famous Hopkins poem where he talks about as kingfishers catch fire, about what it means to Christ plays in 10,000 places. He talks about that. That's the title of another one of his very good books. But about what it means to sort of live in congruence with who God created you to be. There's just so much. There's so many things that he talks about in this book that I find myself thinking about all the time. Like this section here about self-protectiveness as being a kind of exoskeleton, like a crab whose skeleton's on the outside that protects you, but the highest species, human beings, for instance, are those with an internal skeleton, which means that they're vulnerable. So talking about the power in vulnerability. I talk about that some in the book that I have coming out later this year. Or when he's talking about the Beatitudes, and he talks about how odd it was to say, "Blessed are you," because people in the ancient world never wanted to talk about blessing, because there was this idea that if you, and you can see it in a lot of cultures even now, if you talked about how happy you were or how blessed you were, that you were almost daring the gods to do something to you, to sort of catch your notice. Sort of the way that in superstitions now we might say something and knock on wood so that it's not taken away from you. So what Jesus is doing is not only twisting around the understanding of blessing. We can see that blessed are you when you suffer. Blessed are you when people revile you and say all kinds of evil things against you. But also just the very idea of speaking out loud, "I am blessed," was countercultural. There's so much you read in Peterson that stays with you for years and years and years. And then there's this one, which is different from the other books. It's called The Pastor, and it's a memoir. And just really good stuff. And one thing that sticks with me, I think about it probably every day, is he talks about how offended he was one time when his grown son was visiting. He preached, and his son said, "I really enjoyed that sermon, Dad. That's your sermon." And he was offended by that because he said, he's saying that I'm just saying the same stuff over and over again. And his son said, no. He said, every body, it has a sermon that is coming out of the deepest part of themselves. And it's expressed in 1,000 different places. But his son had said when he went off to college and was trying to find a place to go to church, he said, none of the preachers in my community have found their sermon yet. And so that was, for him, it was the highest compliment. I think about that all the time. And the last thing I'll leave you with, it's not anything that is sort of the essential reading of Peterson, but this book, Take and Read, might be something that those of you who like this series would like, because it's Peterson sort of going through and giving an annotated list of things that he considers to be essential reading. I like it because we have a lot of the same taste. a lot of things here are things I also would include, and so I like it. But that might be a good thing to look at. So that's Eugene Peterson. Let me know in the comments what you would like for us to look at and to talk about here in Reading in Exile, and I'll see you next time.